Hello, everybody. My name is Ashish Chaturvedi, and I am a senior fellow at the Adelphi Research and Consultancy firm in Germany. And I'm also an associate fellow at the Institute of Development Studies in the University of Sussex. Today, I'm going to talk to you about sustainable consumption, the transition to a circular economy, as well as your role as citizens of Europe and of the world. So I'll start with a question which basically says that are Europeans setting an example to the rest of the world of living sustainable lifestyles? Is that true? There is widespread discussion on the impact of human activities on the sustainability of our planet. It is fairly common nowadays to talk about climate change, resource scarcities, as well as how societies are infringing on planetary boundaries. There are lots of discussions in the newspapers on the transition to low carbon societies. The upcoming Conference of Parties in Paris in December is widely being discussed in the media, and the conference will discuss global efforts to tackle climate change. But what about citizen action? What can you and I do? Who are the global leaders of leading sustainable lifestyles? Who's taking the lead in confronting these global challenges? Are Europeans setting an example for the rest of the world? It doesn't seem like that if you look at it from the vantage point of communities living in harmony with nature in rural Asia and Africa. In fact, European carbon footprints are still quite high. Largely because of historical reasons, as well as the lock-in effects of lifestyles linked to the use of fossil fuels and unsustainable patterns of consumption and production. An average European has a material footprint of 15 tons, while an average Indian still has a material footprint of less than 5 tons. Just imagine 15 tons of material in your backpack. This is not to suggest that the Indians and Chinese are not aspiring to the lifestyles of the Europeans. A large part of the growing middle class in India not only aspires to the lifestyles of Europeans, but also is actively behaving in that manner, leading to rapid increase in their material consumption. In that sense, the Europeans are not setting a very good example. In fact, the poorest communities in India, China and Africa can teach quite a few lessons to the Europeans and the Americans about sustainable consumption. Due to their resource constraints, financial as well as physical, these communities manage to live fairly sustainable lives. In fact, sustainable consumption for them might mean an increase in the level of consumption, something that cannot be said about an average European or even the rapidly expanding middle class in India and China. The throwaway society that has developed over the last 100 years in Europe and US has had several damaging effects on the environment. One of the most visible effects is the rise in the quantities of waste. While this was a domestic challenge till about 30 years ago, waste is now being exported because it is not wanted in the developed world. It is being sent to developing and emerging countries so that it can be repaired, reused, and recycled. In fact, some of the poorest communities in Asia and Africa enable the richest countries to claim that they are living sustainably. By recycling the waste generated in Europe and the United States, these communities bring resources back into productive use. The high rates of recycling achieved in Europe over the last 2 decades have been accomplished due to the substantive efforts of recycling activities in China and India and other developing countries. I will talk a little later about the reasons for such material flows and making sense of trade and waste. So what can you do as citizens living in Europe? Should you start recycling more so that you do not damage the environment? Would that enable Europeans to become better environmental citizens? Is recycling green, and will it keep your conscience clean? In fact, recycling is far more ethically complex. It is possible and has been observed that recycling might give the consumer a license to consume more. By recycling, The consumer can claim that it is right if I consume a little more. After all, I'm recycling the waste that I'm generating. Such behavior leads to what is recognized in the literature as the rebound effect. Such behavior leads to recycling rebound. The net outcome is that recycling ends up promoting unsustainable consumption practices in countries where it is most important. And worse still, it makes you feel better about consuming more, almost as if by consuming more you would be protecting the environment because you recycle your waste. The second aspect is about where your recycled waste ends up. You might collect all the discarded plastics and aluminum cans almost religiously and pack them all so that they can be recycled. But do you know or care about where your waste ends up? Like most economic activities, cost minimization is a driver for waste management as well. Cost minimization is akin to profit maximization, something every young economist learns in college. In a globalized world where products and materials cross national boundaries with relative ease, waste also flows in the direction where it attracts least cost for management. There are both economic and environmental imperatives that drive this flow of recyclable waste material. The economic imperatives stem from the lower cost of recyclable waste materials as compared to primary mining. It is well known that resources embedded in recyclable waste are much more economical and efficient to use in the production process as compared to primary mining. These recyclables can be used in the manufacturing process in China, India, and elsewhere at a fraction of the cost of materials obtained through primary mining. The rapid expansion of the manufacturing sector in the Asian manufacturing hubs has created the demand for raw materials, some of which can be efficiently met by the imports of recyclable waste. Another source of economic advantage stems from the dominance of China and India in global trade and export of manufactured goods. The rise of exports by India and China has meant that ever more shiploads shiploaded to full capacity traveling to ports around the world. However, the ships returning to China and India, referred to as reverse haulage, are usually empty because most of the countries are net importers of goods in relation to China and India. The effect is that shipping costs to China and India are substantially lower as compared to the shipping costs from these countries. For instance, in the case of United States, the shipping costs to China are 1/4 of the shipping costs from China to the US. In the market for recyclable waste materials, where prices are determined through international competition between companies all around the world, the favorable prices for reverse haulage provide Chinese and Indian importers of recyclable waste materials significant advantages. In fact, reverse haulage is one of the critical reasons for the dominance of Chinese and Indian companies in the recyclable waste materials. At the same time, there are significant environmental imperatives for utilizing recyclable waste material. These imperatives are gaining salience with the growing awareness in China and India of the environmental damages caused by the expanding manufacturing sector. Over the past 5 years, there has been significant domestic pressure within China and India to reduce environmental damages. A key indicator has been the rising number of protests by citizens surrounding manufacturing hubs and mining areas. The environmental damages from the manufacturing sector stem from the backward linkages to the raw material sector. With an expansion in the manufacturing sector, the demand for raw materials has also expanded. By utilizing recyclable waste material, China and India have been able to reduce their dependence on domestic raw materials and the polluting mining sector. However, recycling across borders has its own set of challenges. Due to the relatively lax environmental and social safeguards in emerging and developing countries and the focus on economic growth, recycling of waste has the potential to cause severe damage to the environment and human health. Recycling in the so-called informal sector is largely uncontrolled, and does not fall within the regulatory ambit. The informal sector, well organized and extremely resourceful, has the potential to close material loops, but also, since it's not regulated, causes environmental damage. The big challenge, therefore, is to find solutions that close material loops within and across borders, use the resourcefulness of the informal sector in developing countries, but at the same time ensure that the human environment and human health are not compromised in the developing countries. A concept that has the potential to provide some answers is the circular economy. According to a joint report of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the World Economic Forum, a circular economy is an industrial system that is restorative or regenerative by intention and design. It replaces the end-of-life concept with restoration, shifts the use of renewable energy towards the use of renewable energy, eliminates the use of toxic chemicals which impair reuse and return to the biosphere, and aims for the elimination of waste through superior design of materials, products and systems, and business models. A key element of the circular economy is bringing resources embedded in products back into the production process through repair, reuse, and recycling. What I've just mentioned earlier happening in India and China. The ultimate aim is to have a circular system that eliminates waste and brings the embedded resources and energy in the end-of-life products back into production and consumption processes. Circular economy approaches envisage a fundamental rethinking of the current models of consumption and production. Overcoming traditional linear models of make, use, throw involves changes in the organization of production and consumption systems at various levels, within a firm, within a cluster of firms, as well as within a country and across borders. It has implications for the actors involved at these different levels, from the mining of raw materials, production of components, assembly of final products, consumption of the assembled products, and disposal of post-consumption waste. Working through the implications becomes much more complex once we take into account an increasingly globalized world in which products and services seamlessly cross national boundaries. Modern economies in which all of us live are characterized by large inflows and outflows of materials across national boundaries. Material flows in the form of raw materials, products and waste cross national boundaries through imports and exports. With increasing globalization, these material flows have increased and become much more complex. Excuse me. The increase is largely because of the rise in trade flows between countries. Production and value chains have become increasingly globalized with increased specialization within and at different stages of the value chain. The flows have become much more complex because of the increasing complexity of products. Products now contain multiple raw materials and components that are sourced from countries around the world. Due to these inflows and outflows of materials, modern economies are open systems in a material sense. Circular economy approaches are focused on closing the material loop of these material cycles. As modern economies are open systems in a material sense, closing the loop of material will necessarily need to happen across borders. The transformation from a linear to a circular model would be impossible within national boundaries until a country decides to close itself from international flows of materials. Attempts at promoting circular economy approaches within national boundaries would, as a result, have impacts on circular economy approaches of trading partners as well. The transformation from a throwaway to a circular economy would require innovation in existing models of production, consumption, and waste management. Also, significant innovations would be needed to develop new business models. Historically, such innovations have occurred in the United States and Europe. There is emerging literature and case material on such innovations in both these regions. With China's dominant global position, the transformation to a circular economy across the globe is likely to depend on developing such innovation capabilities within China. However, little is known about innovation capacities amongst Chinese businesses. Anecdotal evidence exists, but there is little by way of analytical research on the innovative capacities within China that would drive the transformation to a circular economy. And I hope some of you would be interested in doing such research in the coming future. But how do we as individuals feature in the circular economy? Consider our reliance on the consumption of durable consumer goods from the electrical and electronic industry. All of us, All of you are consumers of electrical and electronic goods. Our lives today are characterized by a relationship with our electronic possessions more than other human beings. Most of you are engaged with each other through social media. Facebook, WhatsApp, and LinkedIn are our new social engagement platforms more than face-to-face human interaction. All of these interactions are mediated through electronic and electrical devices, just like my interaction with you today is. But how many of us think about what happens to our old electrical and electronic goods? What happens to the old toaster that breaks down after toasting your bread for a year or two? What happens to the old mobile phones which enable your many social media interactions? We are neither aware nor interested in knowing. At least most of us are not. I've worked on electrical and electronic waste management for several years now. In countries like Ghana, China, and India, the old electrical and electronic goods have several lives. Once we discard them, families who are not as fortunate as yours and mine own new devices, use these devices, reuse them. The devices that have reached their end of life are broken down and recycled, often in processes that are damaging not only to the environment but also to human health. So it is not enough to have a circular economy within Europe. It is also not enough to have a circular economy across borders. It is critical that there are collaborative models that engage business, civil society, citizen groups, and government to ensure that circular economy models do not put the burden of recycling and closing material loops on poor countries and the marginalized informal sector in developing countries. That brings us to the final question. So are we good sustainable citizens in Europe? Are you, all of you, good sustainable citizens? The European Union has announced its circular economy package. It is an ambitious program to close material loops and at the same time encourages citizens to recycle and build a domestic industry to deal with recycling. This strategy has the potential to create jobs and develop domestic industrial capacities within Europe. But what about all of you? What about the citizens of Europe? How many of you know whether your buying decision has an impact on your local environment? Further, how many of you have even thought that your buying decision has global implications? With global flows of goods and services, of raw materials and waste, buying decisions of citizens in Europe have significant implications on their local and global environment. I'm not trying to suggest that you should stop buying necessities from tomorrow. I'm not trying to suggest that you should stop buying at all. But if you believe that one more pair of shoes or a new phone or laptop just costs you additional euros, you're mistaken. The costs of your buying decisions are never fully internalized by you or the company that manufactures these products. The consumption of these products creates what economists call externalities. When you buy a car, the emissions are the negative externalities. Your decision to drive a car to work or take public transportation has implications for the global environment. You, as active thinking citizens, can contribute to improving the local and global environment by making conscious decisions and demanding services that minimize the negative environmental externalities. As responsible citizens, you can individually and collectively have an influence on what gets consumed and as a result produced by large corporations. The change in your buying behavior can alter what gets produced. Citizen action has the potential to create change. Although we live in a world where large corporations rule the roost, there are several examples of positive change resulting from citizen action. The political movements in Europe are a case in point. The rising trend of ethical consumption, the growing use of renewable energy, the rising environmental protests in China and India are all driven by civil society and citizen groups. However, systemic and large-scale change would need collaboration across different actors, including those from the business sector and government. Sustainable consumption and circular economy would need to be incentivized by government. The transformation from a throwaway to a circular economy would need innovative business models to offer exciting and attractive ways to be a sustainable consumer, so that sustainability is less about rationing and being prescriptive and more fashionable and feasible. But above all, We would need to form alliances of businesses, policymakers, and citizen groups who have the potential to overcome the resistance from those who stand to benefit from the status quo. This would be the defining challenge of our generation. Thank you very much.